Right, so welcome everyone to our workshop on teaching research as inquiry. I'm so excited to see you all here today. All right, and we'll go ahead and start moving into our presentation. So for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Jane Hammonds. I'm assistant professor in the university libraries at Ohio State University. My title is Teaching and Learning Engagement Librarian, and you can reach me at hammonds.73@osu.edu. Please do feel free to email me if you have questions, comments. I'm always happy to talk more about information literacy. What we're going to be talking about today is we're going to spend just a little bit of time thinking about the concept of research as inquiry, what it means. We're going to think about how this is connected to common research practices. And then we're going to think about some activities and resources that are available to help students start to develop their understanding of this concept. So I would like to just do a quick Zoom poll just to see how folks feel about their understanding of research as inquiry as a concept. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that as a Zoom poll. So it's just one question there, and I'll give everyone a chance to respond. So how would you rate your familiarity with the concept of research as inquiry? We'll give it about 10 more seconds for those folks that would like to respond. All right, so I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1, and end poll. Looks like we got almost everyone. Excellent. So we'll go ahead and share those results. Hopefully folks are seeing those results. So we've got a fairly good portion of folks who have a good understanding of the concept, but also about half the folks that are a little bit unclear or really not sure what it means. So I think that's a really great mix. Hopefully those folks that are not really clear on it will have a better understanding of it today. Hopefully those folks that feel they already have a really good grasp on it will still get some ideas for how we might go about teaching and helping students to understand this concept. I'm going to stop sharing, go ahead and close that. So what exactly do we mean when we talk about the concept of research as inquiry? To get us thinking about this, I'm going to have everyone, if you're comfortable, share your response to 2 questions using a Jamboard. So I'll go over the questions first, and then we'll go out and look at the Jamboard. So the first question is, in your experience, how do you think students would answer the following question? What is the purpose of research? Or you can also do, what is the purpose of research assignments? So that's the first question, thinking from the perspective of students, right? And then our second question is, what do you consider to be the purpose of research or research assignments? So from your own perspective, what do you consider that to be? So we're going to use this a Jamboard to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and put that link in there again. So everyone should be able to see all of those links. So you'll click on the Jamboard link, and that will take you out to where you can put your responses in. I'm going to go ahead and go out to that Jamboard so we can see that. All right, so hopefully everyone should be looking at the Jamboard. If you haven't used the Jamboard before, you can post your response by clicking a sticky note over here on the left-hand side. That will pop up a sticky note and you can post your response. All right, so our first board here is, how do you think students would answer the question? And then up here on the top is where you can switch between boards. And that takes you to that second Jamboard of, what do you consider the purpose of research assignments to be? So we'll let everyone go ahead and share their responses to either of those Jamboards. All right. And so see the responses coming in. I'll give folks a chance to respond since I am asking 2 questions there. All right, so we'll give it, say, 30 more seconds to let folks share their responses. Thanks to the person or people who are moving things around. It's really helpful to see the responses as they move around. All right, so let's take a look and start seeing sort of What do we think as instructors, as librarians, instructional designers? What do we think that students think the purpose of research or research assignments is? So we have some responses here. One person said homework. One person said a hoop to jump through to pass through the class, fulfill instructor expectations. So we're getting right away this idea that, you know, they think it's just sort of busy work or something that they're required to do, but maybe they don't really see a purpose in it other than, you know, this is something that we have to do as college students. So you're seeing that kind of theme in there. You're seeing a lot of folks that are saying responses around helping to understand course content or course material, to show what they've learned. Let's see, or to test their knowledge of the material, to learn about a topic. So we have several responses around that. So it's basically about learning more about a topic, or, you know, understanding topics related to the course, understanding our course material, just learning more about a subject. So we're seeing a lot of responses around that. A couple folks to verify their opinion, to get background information. Let's see, to gauge understanding of class knowledge or topic knowledge. So that we're seeing these kinds of responses, that it's really about testing what students understand, you know, understanding more about specific topics and then kind of testing what students understand about that. Okay, cool, great. So then if that's what we think students think about research assignments, what do we think that research assignments should be? We think research assignments should support critical thinking. Right, so we have a response in there, to answer questions, to answer another question. Let's see, learning about reliable information, learning about reliable sources. Someone has experience of learning how to get into the professional literature, practicing for engaging in scholarship. So a couple of those responses there are about, you know, preparing folks to be part of a discipline, to be part of a field, to understand what scholarly research is. To delve deeper into the topic and give students a more hands-on approach to learning about scholarly communication, to teach students to articulate a question, find sources that might answer your question, and make your own supported conclusions. Absolutely, to get students to learn. Yeah, I think that goes along with this critical thinking comment as well. To practice participations in communities of learning and gain a deeper understanding of the process of inquiry. Move from novice to expert. Great response there as well. So hopefully you're seeing, as we see these responses, perhaps a little bit of a disconnect in terms of what students tend to think of research assignments versus what we as instructors or librarians, what we hope research assignments are doing. You know, that we hope that they're getting students to think critically, to learn to engage and participate as part of these scholarly communities, whereas we have this concern that for a lot of students, it's just about learning more about a topic or learning more about the course content, which is obviously important, but maybe that's not all that we hope that they're actually doing when we have them do research assignments. So great. So thank you all for sharing your responses there. I think that helps us to lead into thinking about the concept of research as inquiry, and why it might be important for students to learn to think of research in this way. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to our presentation. Hopefully everyone should be seeing the presentation. If you're ever at a point where it seems like I'm describing something that you're not seeing, please don't hesitate to let me know. So I wanted to spend just a minute here to play this video really quickly to get us thinking about what we mean when we talk about this idea of research as inquiry. So it's just a little bit over a minute long. Hopefully everyone should be able to hear it.
When Charlie received the grade for his first college research paper, he was disappointed. His professor was also disappointed, since so many students seemed to misunderstand the purpose of the paper. As Charlie talked with his professor, they both began to realize that they thought about research in different ways. For Charlie, in high school, research had consisted of summarizing information he found on a topic and reporting it to his teacher. However, his professor explained that she considered research as inquiry. For her, research is a process focused on problems or questions in her discipline that are unresolved. This process involves steps such as identifying a gap in the literature, developing a research question, and then using an appropriate method to develop a potential answer to the question. Often, she explained, the answers created new questions. For Charlie, who was just starting his academic career, This view of research was at first difficult to understand. However, as Charlie advanced in his major, he learned to think about research as more of an open-ended exploration. His purpose was to answer questions and create new knowledge.
Right. So there we go. That was really quick. So what I was hoping to highlight with that video and the activity that we did was this idea that there's, perhaps a disconnect in some ways between the way that instructors might be thinking about research and the way that students might be thinking about research. And so research is inquiry, as described by the Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education, highlights this idea of research as this iterative and ongoing process, sort of a collaborative process among folks within a discipline or field or profession, where they're focused on questions or problems or issues, areas of conflict within that field, and doing research to try to expand knowledge in that field. So recognizing that the answers that you find as you do research are not always going to be the final answer. And in fact, they're often going to lead to new questions so that the process continues to go on. And knowledge on the field and the topic continues to expand. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about this idea of research as inquiry, this perspective that is shared among a lot of more experienced researchers, sort of the way that we might think about research. And highlighting that and compared to the understanding that many students might have about research. So I wanted to highlight really quickly here, when we talk about research, that we don't necessarily mean that it has to be a traditional, like 10-page research assignments that students would do at the end of class. But thinking about research, or we like to say inquiry-based assignments. So these types of assignments where we really want students to bring together many different types of information, to answer questions, to solve problems, to create their own interpretations, evaluate that information, and then share that information to expand that knowledge on a topic. So I'll pause there just to see if folks have any questions related to the concept of research as inquiry as well. So as I mentioned, this is a concept that's highlighted in the Framework for Information Literacy as one of the core information literacy concepts that it's important for students to understand in order to be able to effectively engage with information. So I'll pause there to see if there are any questions or comments that folks would like to share. And then we'll think about how this connects to research practice. Okay, so if any questions do come up, please again, feel free to feel comfortable adding those into the chat at any time. So Lorraine someone had a sticky that made me think you can contribute to the conversation. You have a voice too. Yes, and I think that is really important. This understanding, we talked last week about scholarship as conversation as well, and those concepts are very closely tied. This idea, it's not just about summarizing what other people say on a topic, but it's about making your own analysis or interpretation, argument, and sharing your own voice on that conversation. Does that mean that research, and does research ever end? Yeah. All right, so connecting concepts to practice. This is a quote that I really liked, and I did modify this quote slightly, but this is by Joan Middendorf and Andrea Baer. And so when it's time to teach undergraduates about research, the original was discipline, it is difficult to explain one's own tacit knowledge. So we are often unaware of what we already know about a concept, a topic, something like research, and we're often unaware of the actual practices that we have. And not in the big picture, but we think there's so much that becomes automatic to us. As we become more experienced researchers, there's understandings that we develop that we may not be even aware that we've developed. There's things that we do, steps that we take that have become so automatic for us that we don't even think about them. And so that can really contribute to why it can be so difficult to teach students about research, because it's become tacit knowledge for us. And so one of the goals of the Framework for Information Literacy was really to highlight what are those things that experienced researchers really understand, what are the things that drives our engagement with information, the expectations that we have for how students are going to engage with information, that we may not even be aware are influencing us. And so they highlight really this concept of research as inquiry as this idea that really influences our expectations for how students will perform on research or inquiry-based assignments, even if we may not be aware of how much we're being influenced by that. So when we think about research as inquiry and how much it connects to all of the different practices that we have when we think about research or research assignments. First of all, very simple, and I think we've already started to really get to this idea, is that there is often just this disconnect between what students think of as research and what instructors think of as research, right? A student might have, as Middendorf and Baer have, like this view of research as this very mechanical process of finding sources on a topic, compiling those sources, summarizing them, and that is what research is. Whereas many instructors are going to be coming at this, right, with this idea of this ongoing iterative process of research that, is driven by questions. It's driven by problems. It's not, we want to learn more about our topics, but that's not the end goal. There's something that we're trying to do there. Developing a research question. This is something that we often ask students to do. And it can be really challenging, right? Because you have to think of research the way that we think about research is, what are the gaps in the literature out there? What are the places where there's conflict within our discipline, where there's questions that haven't been answered yet, where there's questions that haven't been asked yet? And so, this can be really challenging, especially for students that don't have a really strong background in the literature in the field. And, for them, research is about learning more about a topic because they don't know anything about the topic yet to even be able to know what questions they can ask. So you have to have a lot of knowledge about the field before you can really do research in the field. Okay? Identifying search terms. This is, of course, closely connected to this idea of research as inquiry. I don't know if anyone has had the experience like I had once when I had a student, and the student had a research question. It was in a psychology class. The student had a good research question, but we're having trouble finding information. And when I sat down to watch them search, the term that they typed into the search bar was psychology, right? And so not recognizing that your search terms have to be built directly on your research question or your questions, and identifying what those main concepts in those questions are, and making sure that the terms that you search for are actually going to get you results that will help you to develop your answer to your question. Evaluating sources. So this is, of course, obviously a really key part of any research assignment project. And often we see the idea that students become focused on the number of sources that they need, right? I need this many sources and that's it. And not thinking about the fact that they really need to think about how their sources contribute to answering their research question. And that's why it can be so challenging when students will sometimes ask, how many sources do I need? Well, it depends. It depends on, what your question is. It depends on what you find. And it can be challenging to give a clear number of sources that are needed. Or if there is that number that is given, it can often be students become so focused on that, and that's all they want is to meet that expectation for how many sources that they need. So to give an example there, and in one of the assignments that I was working with students on, that they needed 5 sources. And the student had found 5 sources, and they were all 5 credible sources. But 3 of the sources basically all said the exact same thing. And so when I was talking to this student about this, it was like, you can, one of these sources is going to give you all the information that you need in this particular area. These other 2 sources just say the same thing, so they're not going to provide any value to you. So yes, you have the right number of sources. Yes, you have credible sources, but are they really going to all help you answer your research question? And then, of course, making an argument or providing an interpretation. Because of this idea that research is this ongoing process, this iterative process, we recognize when we do research ourselves that we're not going to find that one single right, correct answer, right? Or we're not likely to find that one single right correct answer. We know that there's still going to be more questions, and that we give recommendations in our articles for here's how to take my research and expand on it. But if students are approaching research thinking that I need to find the right answer, that can be like a bottleneck to them. And then, of course, just in terms of dispositions that we hope students have, patience, persistence, flexibility, right? That willingness to, I'm going to develop my initial research question. I'm going to do some searching. I'm going to revise my research question. I'm going to search again. I'm going to try my search terms again, right? And so understanding and accepting that messy and ambiguous nature of research, I think can be really challenging for a lot of students. And then just wanted to last thing highlight, this is another quote from Mendorf and Baer. One of the things they found in their own research that developing this understanding of research as inquiry was something that students in their research really struggled with. And it's something that instructors struggled to teach or portray research in this manner as well. So that it really is an important, a difficult mental shift to start thinking of research as this inquiry-driven process rather than just the mechanical process of finding and bringing together sources. Right. So I'm going to pause there to see if there are questions, comments. If you see other connections between aspects of the research process and the idea of research as inquiry, I'd love to share. I just highlighted the ones that I think are have been most relevant in my own work. But if you see other connections, please feel free to share those as well. Yes, cool. So we'll give it just a few more seconds to see if folks have any questions or comments. And then we'll move into our next part where we're going to be thinking about some activities and resources that we can use. So I hope those folks that indicated earlier that they weren't really quite sure on the concept of research as inquiry, I hope that it has become more clear to you. If not, please don't hesitate to say so in the chat and we can chat more about what exactly it means when we're talking about research as inquiry. So Lorraine shared, maybe this is obvious, but after sharing ways to search and sources, they still said, but where do I start? Yeah. And I think that's, that's part of that challenge is, when we go into a research project, we have a sort of an idea where to start, but it takes a lot of research to really get to the point where you can really start researching in a lot of cases, right? So you have a vague idea initially of what you want to ask, and then you start doing some background research, and then you narrow down and focus. And so it's not like there's always a clear, here's, the starting point. It's a process that develops over time. Yeah. All right. So again, please feel free to continue posting in the chat and we'll go ahead and talk about some teaching activities. So I'm going to put this in the chat one more time. So for this activity, we're going to be using a Menti. So I put that Mentimeter poll, that link there in the chat. And sorry, go back here. I'm going to escape out of this and actually go out to the Menti. And what this should allow you all to do is to vote on your agreement or disagreement with certain statements related to research. So the purpose of research is to compile information on a topic. The purpose of research is to find the single right answer to your question. And the purpose of research is to increase your understanding of a topic. So you should be able to use the slider to move back and forth to indicate your level of agreement or disagreement with those statements. So I'll give everyone a chance to start sharing their responses there, and hopefully everyone can see the responses as they are moving back and forth. right, so I'll give everyone just a few more seconds, those folks that would like to share their responses. Right, so as we look here at our responses, you can see that we have, for the purpose of research, is to compile information on a topic. Sort of, we have our average that's sort of a, on the 1 to 5 scale, about 3.1 there. For the purpose of research is to find a single right answer to your question. Most folks seem to strongly disagree with that one. So that's really over to the left. And then for the last one, the purpose of research is to increase your understanding of a topic. We have fairly strong agreement for folks on that. That is one of the purposes of research. Yeah. So thank you all for sharing your responses there. So I just wanted to share that as one example of the type of activity that you could do with your students to really start developing an understanding of what they think the purpose of research is. And of course, there's not going to be one right answer to that. There's a lot of different purposes of research, but sharing statements like that can give you an understanding of what they're thinking about what the expectations around research are. And so, that's a version of a type of assignment that I do a lot with students. And you can do various things. So these true, false kinds of statements, or this kind of agreement or disagree kind of statements. I've also done these as like 2 truths and a lie kind of activities. But I find these short activities really helpful for identifying what students, sort of their prior knowledge on the topic or their prior expectations on a topic. And for identifying where they might have misconceptions. So if you did that poll and you had a bunch of students say that the purpose of research is to find the single right answer to the question, you would have a really good understanding that maybe I need to talk to students a little bit more about, how I approach research and how more experienced researchers tend to approach research. So that kind of activity can be very simple, very quick, but can give you some really good feedback on what students are actually thinking about when we think about research. And I'm not sure how often, just in general, we really talk to students about what the purpose of research is when we give research or inquiry-based assignments. So I think just having this discussion can be, really helpful for both you and for the students. Another example of an activity, this is a defining activity. So I showed the video earlier. You could do something very similar to that. So, have students first identify what do they think research as inquiry might mean. Then we could show the video. There's several different videos out there on research as inquiry. If you didn't like that one, you don't have to use that one. And then, talk about and discuss what, how the video compared to their initial definition of that. And, they might say, if you say research as inquiry, a lot of them might say, I have no idea what that means. And that's fine. That would be a good place to start that discussion. I think sometimes highlighting, especially for the librarians in the audience, we know that students sometimes come into our sessions thinking that they already know everything about research. So sometimes highlighting things that they don't know can be a good way to get them a little bit more engaged in the session. Another activity, I've shared versions of this activity before as well. This is based on James Lang, his minute thesis activity. So this is kind of similar to what we did earlier when we were connecting research as inquiry to specific research practices. But in this case, you would have students do that themselves. So you would tell them a little bit about the concept of research as inquiry, and then identify specific aspects of the research process and have them make the connection themselves. So we've talked about research as inquiry. How does research as inquiry relate to evaluating information sources? And just see what connections they come up with. We think it's really important, that students have a chance to start making those connections themselves rather than always giving them the connections. So that's, again, an activity that you could do that could be, fairly quick, or it could be longer depending on how many concepts you want to give them and how detailed you want to go. But again, so that students can start really making that connection between, this is why the expectations are there. This is why I'm expected to develop a research question. This is why I need to be careful about the search terms that I use. And so that they can start really making those connections for themselves. So we have another activity here that I'd like us to do. And so that is the link in the chat there as well. That is to the research questions activity. And what that should take us out to is, I'm going to use that link myself here. That takes us out to a shared document. Hopefully everyone should be able to edit this document. So what you should be seeing is the document with several different articles. I've broken the articles up by last name, so A through E, F through J, K through O, P through T, and then U through Z. So there should be a link to your article there. So you can select the article that fits with your last name. And what I'd like everyone to do is go out and take a look at that article and see if you can identify the research question or questions. And then go ahead and post those research questions or questions to the shared document. So I've tried to identify articles where it should be fairly easy to see the research question either in the abstract, in the introduction, or that it's somewhere highlighted really clearly in the text. So I'll give everyone a chance to go ahead and take a look at those articles. And if you have a chance to look and find that research question, you can go ahead and post that into the document. So give everyone just a little bit more time. So I see some responses have been posted. We'll just give everyone just a little bit more time. Since I know I'm having everyone go out and look at different articles. Of course, Lucky had to join us for the presentation today. Watch out, Lucky. All right, so as we're looking at some of the responses that have come in, so let's see here. We have, does the academic library one-shot result in improved information literacy, knowledge, or skills of undergraduate students? Is the one-shot an effective modality for learning? Does the pedagogical use of the flipped classroom module during one-shot information literacy impact student learning? What are student perceptions of the use and value of information literacy videos from a flipped one-shot perspective? So we have, what is the impact of one-shots? Some folks have had, is a clicker augmented learner center approach to one-shot instruction more effective than traditional lecture-based library instruction? So is there a future in one-shot information literacy sessions, or what is the future of one-shot information literacy sessions? So thank you everyone that have posted and shared the research questions that you identified in those articles. As we think about the questions that we see there, are there any characteristics that we see in common of these questions? Obviously, they're all focused around the one-shot instruction session. But anyone have any ideas of sort of connections or characteristics of questions that they're seeing here? Go ahead if someone wanted to speak. And yeah, folks can feel free to unmute if they would like to speak, or they can share their response in the chat. So one of the characteristics that I see, right, is that none of these questions can be answered with a quick Google search, right? None of these questions can be answered with a date or a fact or a name. So they're all open-ended questions, right? They would all require some research. They would all require more sources to answer, or they would all require some sort of active, research engagement to answer these kinds of questions. So this is an example of an activity that I think would be really helpful with students, where each student could be assigned to identify a specific research question, and make a list of all of those research questions that you see. And this can really help get students an idea of, first of all, just the kinds of questions that instructors tend to ask, or that researchers tend to ask, so you could have them do it within the specific discipline, around a specific topic. Here are the kinds of questions that folks who are interested in this topic ask. And here are the characteristics of those questions. I don't know how many of you have had students develop initial research questions and have them being closed-ended questions, but that's been a common experience for my work with students. They answer simple questions that could be answered very quickly with a Google search. And so we have to talk about, that's not what we're thinking of when we think about research questions. So doing an activity like this can really start getting students familiar with thinking about, here are the kinds of questions that researchers around this topic ask, that researchers in this discipline ask. Here's how they frame their questions, so that they kind of start to expand their understanding of what it is when we're thinking about research questions. So thank you all folks for participating in that activity. I think it would work a little bit better if we had more questions to look at, but it's a little challenging to work within this very short time period. But thank you all for that activity. Very closely related to that, an activity that I just call researching research in the disciplines, right? So it's very similar concept, but we just have students look at articles in the field and say, what is the purpose of this research? What actions actually constituted research in this field? And having students create, lists, shared lists of, here's what the research was about. Here's what the researcher actually did. Here's the questions that they were trying to answer. So they start to develop that understanding of, this is what research looks like in this discipline, because we know that's not going to be the same for all disciplines. But as they start becoming more familiar with those types of questions, they'll have better ideas of the kinds of questions they can develop themselves, the actions that researchers take in the field. So, starting to expand their understanding of what research is. And this is, I think, our final very quick little activity. So I have two analogies here for research, A and B. So the first is, the process of research is like going to the grocery store with a specific recipe and quickly finding exactly what you need. Or the process of research is like going to the grocery store with a general idea of what you're looking for, coming home, reviewing the ingredients that you have, then deciding what you want to make, and realizing that some of the ingredients that you bought you don't really need, but some of the ingredients you need are missing, so you have to go back to the store again. So which of those analogies best matches your understanding of research? All right, so we see a lot of responses coming in as B, which is as expected. So I think that this kind of activity using research analogies could be really one that would be helpful for students. And Middendorf and Baer, also, this is a recommendation that they give in the article that I have cited as well. And there are different ways that you could do this. So you could have students initially develop their own analogy for research. Maybe you share one first to kind of get them started and then have them develop their own. Or you could do sort of what I did, where you do kind of paired analogies and have them pick the one that you think best matches their understanding of research. So this just is, as an activity, as a way to get students thinking about research in a different way, comparing it to things that they do in their everyday life, so that they're perhaps developing a little bit more complex understanding of what research actually is. Let's see, so Lorraine, I'm thinking of asking, have you ever researched anything in your life, and what was your experience? Buying a car, traveling? Why don't I just go into a car lot and just grab the one that I can afford? Yeah, I think that's a great question to get started with having students think about research. Lorraine, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, and if other folks have other ideas for analogies that they've used, I would love to hear those as well. One of my colleagues in the teaching and learning department, Michael, he had shared one with me about researches like digging clay out of the ground to create a brick. And then when you try to add that brick to the wall, it doesn't fit. So you have to reshape it and add it again until you create something solid enough that fits enough that you can actually build on that to continue creating that wall, which I thought was a really good analogy as well. Jordan shared, I associate research with online shopping. You tell the website what you need, how soon you need it, what size you want. Yes. Yeah, so thanks. So Rocky, I keep thinking of Guinness Book of World Records. Bar bets can be the ultimate research questions. Yeah. Cool. All right, so I think that was the last activity that I had in there. So if other folks, if you have other activities or resources that you use to teach research and inquiry, I'd love to hear those. So please feel free to share those in the chat. I'd love to hear again your analogies, the comparisons that you use to help students understand research. But I do think that just going into class and talking about like, what does it mean to research is not always a conversation that students have often had. And I think can be very illuminating to both you and the students to have that kind of conversation. Research, I think, is one of those terms that we use so much and so often. And I don't know if we always take the time to really define it the way that we should. All right, so we've got a few minutes left, just a few teaching resources that I wanted to share with everyone. So the first one I'm going to highlight, I've mentioned this before, folks that are interested in this site. This is our Ohio State Instructor Resources at University Libraries site. And so we've tried to bring together a lot of different resources that folks at Ohio State and folks at not at Ohio State can also use. So over here on the left-hand side, you'll see we have teaching, research, and information literacy. So here we've tried to bring together a lot of different videos, activities, readings related to research. So I wanted to highlight here that we have this research questions section. And you can see here that we have specific readings about the purpose of research, developing research questions, how research questions differ from regular questions. I pulled together some videos from other places on developing a research question that we found really helpful. And doing background research, of course, a key part of the research process. And then we have some activities here as well. So folks can feel free to use any of those materials that have been brought together there. I did also want to highlight that we have over here again on the left-hand side, Carmen course modules. So for non-Ohio State folks, Carmen is what we call our version of Canvas. And so we do have Canvas modules that you can request. For Ohio State folks, you can request these and they can be downloaded directly into your course, modified as needed and used in your Canvas course. And you'll see here that we do have ones on understanding research as inquiry. So if you're interested in having that module and using that in your course, you can go ahead and put a request in there and we'll send that module directly to you. If you are not associated with Ohio State, you can feel free to go ahead and put a request in anyway, and we can send you the Word version of the module. Let's see, Scott shared, watch a comedy show, make fun of research result, and work backward to determine sensible research questions that led to that result. All right, so there's a couple of resources there that I wanted to share. So I did want to mention, in addition to the student-facing Canvas module that we have, I've also developed an instructor-facing Canvas module. So this is meant to guide instructors through the process of thinking about and teaching research as inquiry. So you can see I have there, a lot of research question or activities in there that are available for helping students think about the purpose of research or developing a research question. So again, if that is something that you are interested in taking as an instructor, you can send me an email and I'll make sure to get you that content or to send you that module if you're from Ohio State. And oh, thank you, Julia. Found the module very helpful. Wonderful. All right, and let's see, a couple other things. So the past couple years, I've given a presentation on approaching research as inquiry to students in our undergraduate research program. It's always been a really good discussion. Students are always really, they always share at the end, like, oh, I didn't know that I could revise my research question, or I didn't, I hadn't really thought about research in this way before. So if you're interested in using that presentation, the presentation slides are available. You're free to use those, to modify those as needed. I also have a shortened version of that presentation, a video that's about 3 minutes long, that you can use as well, that really just tries to get students to approach thinking about research as this process of inquiry. So all that material is available to you, and I'll share links to everything, of course, in the follow-up email. And then these are just a bunch of different resources on research as inquiry that I find helpful, videos that other libraries have developed. So I wanted to share those as well. We still have a few minutes left in case folks have any questions. I would love to hear them. Any key takeaways that you would like to share, love to hear those. Next steps that you might be thinking about how you could approach teaching research as inquiry. So I'll give folks a chance to think about those questions. I'll just mention briefly, we still have 4 more workshops coming up in this series. Next week is information literacy and digital wellness. I'm going to be joined by one of my colleagues from the Student Wellness Center to talk about that concept there. So I hope folks will be interested in joining us for that. And we just have some references there. All right, so I'll go back here and surprisingly have 7 minutes left. So I will leave it open for questions, comments, thoughts that folks would like to share. Lorraine, what do you mean by Wicked Info Lit? That's a great question, Lorraine. So our last workshop of this series is Wicked Information Literacy. And basically that is based on a book that was published a few years ago by Scott Hanstead, who's called Creating Wicked Students. And so it looks at information literacy from the perspective of creating wicked students who are able to deal with wicked problems. So that's what that focus is there. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, and I'm going to stick around for questions, comments, ideas that folks have. And I will send a follow-up email to everyone with links to everything. Hope everyone has a great day. Lorraine, it's always affirming to see folks have similar issues, not alone. Yes. It is definitely always helpful to know that we're not the only one that are seeing these issues. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Lorraine. Tammy, thank you. Adrian, thanks. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now, but I will stick around for a few more minutes.